We are live tonight from beautiful Los Angeles, California, where polls close exactly 2 hours from right now. Across the country tonight is election night. If not Super Tuesday, then it's at least pretty darn good Tuesday. And that's all the excuse we need to play my favorite song. Voters in 12 states around the country cast ballots today in races that will help define November's big midterm elections. Between now and Election Day in November, today is actually the biggest day in terms of the number of races that are simultaneously being held. Within the last few hours, polls have officially closed in Georgia, in Maine, in New Jersey, in North Dakota, in South Dakota, in South Carolina, and in Virginia. A few of those races have already been decided tonight. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, Republican State Senator Robert Hurt has easily won a 7-way primary in the 5th Congressional District. Mr. Hurt will now take on incumbent Democratic Congressman Tom Perriello in November. There was a possibility with Mr. Hurt's election that one of the people who he defeated in that primary might consider mounting a third-party Tea Party challenge even in the general election. We will be keeping an eye, of course, on developments there to see if that happens. That, of course, would be great electoral news for Tom Perriello, the Democrat. Also in Virginia, Republican Congressman Rob Whitman has held off a primary challenge from Tea Party favorite Catherine Crable. Catherine Crable, famous probably national, she's famous, if at all, nationally, for saying last year when she was running for the Virginia House of Delegates that we have a chance to fight this battle at the ballot box before we have to resort to the bullet box. Bullet box? In any case, she lost. Congressman Whitman cruised to victory tonight. He was the only Republican congressman facing a primary challenge tonight. Those races have already been decided this evening, but perhaps no single race tonight has gotten as much national attention as the one that's happening tonight in the state of Arkansas. Within the last half an hour, polls have closed in Arkansas. Incumbent conservative Democratic Senator Blanche Lincoln is fighting there for her political life, fighting to win her party's nomination for her own seat. Senator Blanche Lincoln's primary challenge tonight is roughly from her left. It's from Arkansas Lieutenant Governor Bill Halter. Senator Lincoln attracted the primary challenge after she helped derail the public option during last year's health reform debate. Tonight's race in Arkansas is a runoff because Senator Lincoln failed to win 50% of the vote during last month's Democratic primary. She and Bill Halter got roughly 45 and 43% of the vote, respectively, and a third-party candidate was in the low teens. Whoever wins round 2 tonight between Lincoln and Halter will be the Democratic nominee for the United States Senate in Arkansas come November. Here are the latest numbers that we've got in. There's less than 1% of precincts reporting, so don't extrapolate from these numbers. But at this point, we've got about 54% for Senator Lincoln to 46% to Lieutenant Governor Halter. But again, that's less than 1% of precincts reporting. Results are very early in that case, and we'll be keeping a very close eye on them throughout the night. Joining us now is NBC News political director Chuck Todd. He's also NBC's chief White House correspondent. Mr. Todd, it is good to see you as always.
It's great to be here on a, you're right, it's a pretty good Tuesday. And it became a great Tuesday here in Washington because our boy Steven Strasburg has looked so good in a Nationals uniform. We need something here for sports, but I digress.
Not that you're trying to focus on something other than politics on Pretty Good Tuesday, Chuck.
Pretty Good Tuesday.
Right,
this is going to catch on.
Pretty Good Tuesday.
Right.
I think so. I mean, it's hard to call this Super Tuesday. It's a midterm election year. It's not a presidential election year. And it's hard to keep track of what's happening on any one night. But obviously the big thing that everybody's focusing on right now is Arkansas. Polls closed there about a half an hour ago. We've got less than 1% of precincts reporting. Are there any good indications at this point about which direction it's heading?
Not in the actual numbers, and it's really hard to look at the results and extrapolate that out. Look, the rule of runoffs is this. When an incumbent gets forced into one, and she did as poorly as she did in the first round, this is Blanche Lincoln, it's hard to imagine how she somehow gets over 50%. She did very well with African-American voters in the first round. If turnout, she needs a good turnout among African-American voters. It's something that the president's support has helped there a little bit. Bill Clinton's campaigning for her has helped a little bit. That's sort of her key here, and the expectation has been that you're not going to see a large turnout among African-American voters, and that will be among the keys for Halter to be able to go over the top here. But, one thing we ought to mention is whoever wins is a big underdog against the Republican here. Remember, this is a state that was one of just 4 states where Barack Obama performed worse than John Kerry did the previous 4 years. This is a state that is trending more Republican, even in a year that was a big Democratic year in 2008. So both of them will be underdogs. The question that you have is, if Bill Halter wins, will Labor, who was very heavily invested in him in this primary, will they stick with him even if he looks like a huge underdog going into the fall or in the fall? And that'll be an interesting test for those loyalties, because he certainly has been there for them during this primary, was able to send that message, but how far do they take that message?
Well, surely Labor's interest here is, it's more to the Blanche Lincolns of the world than it is to the Bill Halters of the world, in the sense that they're trying to get Democratic candidates to toe a better line on labor issues. And so abandoning Bill Halter to lose in the general election would seem to undercut their own point of throwing so many resources into beating Blanche Lincoln, wouldn't it?
It would, and this is where you've had this fight inside the Democratic Party and sort of the establishment. It's a friendly fight here a little bit, but you get this little debate inside, if you want to call it Democratic salons of Washington, where they sit there and you have one part of the party apparatus saying, what are you doing? You're spending all this money. Now you've committed yourself. You've spent, say, $6 million, approximately what a lot of these labor groups have spent on Halter's behalf. Are you going to really spend that much more money when maybe candidates are going to need it in Ohio more, or you might have a better shot in a Kentucky, or you might be doing better in a place like Missouri? Are you going to stretch yourself thin? And that's why there's been so much anguish inside the Democratic Party and sort of the establishment apparatus over this primary challenge, because they worry that it's going to just divert resources that the party may need more of in Ohio, Kentucky, Missouri, you name the Senate race.
Well, Chuck, in terms of the relationship between this race, which has been an exciting and interesting thing, I think, for the Democratic base and the sort of Democratic establishment, there is a perception that the White House has sort of stepped back from this race. Of course, they're not actively supporting Bill Halter, but their ostensible support for Blanche Lincoln doesn't exactly have a brass band out in front of it. Is the perception that the White House is sort of letting Blanche Lincoln go, is that perception accurate, and could that lack of support affect the outcome here?
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, if you say that they've stepped back, that assumes that they somehow stepped forward. And while the president lent his name to Blanche Lincoln for direct mail pieces, he did record a couple of radio ads, he hasn't exactly been active for her. Bill Clinton was sort of the surrogate as far as the White House was concerned, as far as helping Blanche Lincoln more than anything else. But you're right, there is this perception where the White House, I'll be honest, they see the writing on the wall in the fall, and they say, you know what, this is a race that's going to be tough with either one of them. They come at this assuming that Blanche Lincoln is more ideologically suited to survive, to potentially win in the fall than Bill Halter. But you got to say this for Bill Halter. He has somehow made this challenge less left versus center in this primary, which could be helpful in the fall, and more outsider versus insider. And the one thing everybody needs to do is take a deep breath for 3 weeks before writing off Bill Halter if he does win. Everybody needs to take a deep breath and see, can he run a similar campaign against a sitting member of Congress, the Republican nominee there, John Bozeman, who voted for both, quote, bailouts, both Wall Street bailouts, where Blanche Lincoln only voted for one of them. Is that can he duplicate that campaign against Bozeman? I think after 3 or 4 weeks, after the dust settles, assuming Halter does win this runoff, like a lot of people expect, then we'll have a real idea of whether this becomes a competitive race in the fall.
I totally agree with you, and I think that's right, Chuck. And I think that there's a sort of facile common wisdom about this race, that on the left there's a mirror image of what's going on with the ideological fight that's going on within the Republican Party, where people really are obviously running from the right against Republican establishment candidates.
Right.
I do think it's not so easy to call Halter a challenge from the left. In some senses he is, in some senses he's not. But this is going to be a fascinating result tonight, Chuck. Thank you very much for your help understanding it. I'm sure we'll check in with you later. Thank you.
You got it.
NBC News political director Chuck Todd. All right. To be honest with you, the biggest, most important result that everybody's waiting on tonight is that Democratic runoff in Arkansas. Again, right now, we've still got very few precincts reporting. We're still at less than 1% in. Blanche Lincoln had 53 to 47. As Chuck Todd mentioned, a lot of observers are expecting Bill Halter to actually win in this race. It's way too early to say in terms of the results. Turnout is going to be important. Turnout very hard to predict in a midterm election runoff race. But that's the one big, serious Democratic result everybody is waiting on tonight. It's going to be an exciting night watching those results come in.